Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Hard Things Podcast. This is your host, Blaine Burgess. Sorry, I just had to take a drink of the Sprite there. It has been a while. This is episode 88. It's going to be called 5 and 2, I think. That's going to be the title. Kind of came up with that on the fly. I had to put myself under pressure to get it. Like I said, it's been a while. There's a couple of good reasons for that. My life since the beginning of this trimester, it's now week 6 of the trimester here at Parker University in Dallas, Texas. And if you don't know anything about that, we have 3 trimesters. That's why it's tri. And then there's 15 weeks each, so that's 45. And the year contains 52. So you can imagine there's very little break. I'm excited. At the end of this one, there's 3 weeks that we get off. It's just like a leap week. Usually it's two weeks, and then 3 or 4 for Christmas is kind of how it usually shakes out. But I think every now and then they got an extra week in there. So it's kind of how the math works out. So very excited for that for a couple of reasons. I think I'm going to do a pilgrimage not only to Mount Horeb, Wisconsin, to go see the home of the creator of my style of chiropractic, but also Palmer College in Iowa, not too far from Wisconsin. And it's like a little bit of a pilgrimage, and then go up to probably just through Chicago back to Columbus to see my family and get ready for what ultimately becomes my internship in September, taking patients as early as October. So that is right on my radar. And as you can imagine, it can be a little bit, I'm not intimidated or scared. I'm really honestly energized, which is great. But that energy, uncontrolled energy, I wouldn't even call it anxiety. It's just like excitement to do my life's work. And I have to build structures that can contain that flow and make it work here on Earth in the physical world. So very excited for that, of course. But also, I don't think I've mentioned it yet on this podcast. I do have another one called Gonstead Revival, which is about said man from Wisconsin. And that is the name of my style of chiropractic. But I had a bit of a run-in with a chiropractic fraternity. This run-in was very positive. I'm not a member of the fraternity, but I was in the process to become one, and removed myself from that process for, I guess, a handful of reasons, but really just one. This series of podcasts is about God. I think God, as I listen in more intently, God wanted me to break bread with this chiropractic fraternity, Delta Sigma Chi. Dr. Gonstead was a member of it. It was started at Palmer College, the 2 places I'm visiting. On paper, I think it was as a match. I think a lot of the members of the fraternity thought so as well. And part of their thing is you go through it with a group of guys. In a fraternity, you become brothers. And the process that we were in, the group of guys I was with, it just didn't pan out. That's really as simple as that. There's a lot of emotions about it, and there's different excuses I could make or people I could blame, but really, I just didn't make it through that process, and I had to, pull myself out. Because at the end of the day, the main goal is to become a chiropractor. And as much as I would love to be in that fraternity, I believe in their mission, and my mission is very largely aligned with theirs. So I'm going to keep doing my mission, and they're going to keep doing theirs, and together we're all going to further our profession. So all that mixed in with, so like that's in the past. There's some stuff on the horizon. And very recently too, I had to go back to Ohio because my grandmother passed away. And this is a woman who I don't know that she necessarily would have been able to listen to this podcast. She was having trouble with her hearing. Maybe if it was transcribed, she could have read it, but I don't think she was just feeling well either. I don't think her vision was, I don't think anything was that good towards the end in terms of senses, but I did get to see her on the last break. We made eye contact. She knew I was in the room, and I think she was pleased with that. I kind of got to say goodbye in my own way. So a lot of people always claim that funerals are a celebration of life, and they kind of want that for that funeral, for that person, whoever it may be to them. And it's almost sometimes in a wishful manner, like they don't want to feel the grief. And I think just due to the nature of her life, especially towards the end, she had multiple spinal fusions, and to be quite frank, I didn't see that much of her when I was growing up. We lived in the city, they lived in the deep country in Ohio, kind of somewhere between Athens, Ohio University, Joe Burrow country, and Columbus, Ohio. So when we would go see them, it was an hour one way into the hills, and I remember getting nauseous every time we'd go over these hills. They were crazy. It was like a insane drop. Like, would have loved to sled out there. Probably would have got killed by a car or something, but it was always a treat to go visit them, but we just didn't see them as often as, maybe someone else whose grandparents lived closer and also saw them more than someone who didn't have grandparents at all. So the experience was mine and ours as a family, and I'm grateful for it. But I digress. It was a celebration of life. It was genuinely, I feel like people had maybe grieved already through the past couple of decades even. The amount of pain she was in, always on a ton of pain medication. And I think towards the end there, she finally did move to the city. My grandpa passed like 2012, I think was the year. And I graduated college in 2014, and the train keeps moving. My grandma moved into the city, back to where they lived when my mom was growing up, not far from where my parents live and where I grew up. And she was there for a while. I would see her every so often, but I know she was always in pain, and she always didn't necessarily want to be seen or live life, or because she was in so much pain, she couldn't do like activities of daily living like we're learning in chiropractic school. People just like some things as simple as bathing and dressing, and once you do all that, trying to like do your hair or anything just becomes such a chore and like a pain laden, like you'd almost rather just stay in your sweatpants and not have anyone over, so we saw her as much as she would kind of allow. But she was always in so much pain. Then when she went to live in like a care facility, and then eventually to the rehab hospital, like where it was like hospice and like kind of end of life care, like we knew it wasn't like a secret that this was going this way. So I think the way it happened, like there's a lot of things I would personally change about it, things I want to change for people in the future, things I want to change for my own parents and, anyone in my family or my friend group. I want to do as much as I can to kind of change how that looks. But because the grief had kind of been dealt with over time, but we had this immense amount of time to deal with this grief. When it came to being at the actual, like the showing and then the funeral in the cemetery, it was honestly one of the most beautiful ones I'd ever been at. And I've been to a lot of funerals, and it seemed like there was always like meat left on the bone, or things that went unsaid, or you name it. Like there was just more work to be done, and it like couldn't be done anymore. Like this person was gone, so it just couldn't happen. But in this case, it felt like life lived, life completed, life to be celebrated. And when you think about women, she created my mom, who created me. So just on that pure fact alone, like take everything else out of it, like I owe everything to her and my mom. So like my mom learned how to nurture from my grandma, and my mom took care of me, in a great way. So I think, it was just it's like a point in time. Like even though there wasn't really that much grief, it's still also like a symbol of time passing. And sometimes even if it's not necessarily about the person, it can be about the time leaving, or honestly, it can be kind of selfish and be like, okay, that means I'm next up, like you think generationally, like now none of my grandparents are living. So what does that mean for me? Well, nobody else is coming to save you. My football coach in high school used to say, so-and-so is not walking through the door, and all of a sudden you're a freshman, you're 15 years old, but you played in most of the games in the regular season. You show up as a sophomore and you're playing 100 plays a game, like I was. Like go straight to the deep end. There's nobody else coming to take care of us. So you have to then, put your big people pants on and handle it and take care of the next generation, build my future family, and help my sister take care of her kids and be a good uncle. And it's a good example, and it's good work. That's the thing. It's like you celebrate just a life of good work. And again, even just birthing and raising my mom the way she did, that was like enough. So everything else after that, every time we got to see them was like, gravy on the mashed taters. So I went I went exactly 14 minutes on that, and that's how important it is. Basically half an episode. And I think I started to say that I think she would have enjoyed this series, but she doesn't need me to tell her about the Book of John. But I do need to talk about it with you right now. So to bring it back around, we had a first episode, turning the water into wine, and Jesus being the true vine. So kind of the first miracle, and then the last I am statement. And we have healing the Roman son, like I am the way, truth, and life. So kind of bringing it towards the center. And we had healing at the Bethesda pool. We had him being the gate for sheep. So that's kind of bringing it again once more towards the center. And now we are able to be at that center. And I think everything that happened to me over the past 5 to 6 weeks has brought me to my center. So the perfect place for me to be in delivering this episode and subsequently delivering more episodes to catch up. So excited to dig in. This one's especially dear to me because if you listen to the podcast, you know I've had some relationships in the past couple of years that have challenged me, and the Book of John and shows like The Chosen, they take some creative liberties when it comes to the Book of John. Like in the show The Chosen, Simon Peter has a wife named Eden, and they talk about themes like miscarriage and like just general like marriage strife. And I think it's amazing to take that chance, because you're taking the Bible, something that people think is sacred, and you know, Jesus was the living word. You know, he was living the word of God. And I think the Bible, at least when I came across it, when I first started going to church, it was stale. It was dead. Like the word was on the page, but it didn't have any feeling or behind it. And I would go to Sunday school, and the kids didn't really want to be there. Their energy was scattered, and it made it hard for me to focus. And I felt kind of left out there. And then I went to adult church, and I could understand what they were saying, but it was so like drab and like depressing. And then you see like the parents in there, and you see the kids, and you're like, oh well, that makes sense, you know. And then meanwhile I go home, and my dad was a wrestling coach and like servant of like a teacher, and like serving people all the time. My mom was serving us as a mother. So I just had these like incredible, examples of servants, and looking around in the world and going like, man, there's some people serving out there, but there's some people really just not hitting the mark. And I think even from a young age, I could see people's potential or see the goodness in them, and just was so upset that they wouldn't just let it out. Like, just be good. Like, you are good, just be good. I didn't know how to like deal with that for a long time. So all of that to bring it back to relationships. And so whether it comes to this fraternity, kind of healing my relationships where, I'd been betrayed by male friends in the past, or, losing a grandmother, but having a family come together kind of better than we ever have. Like we've done well, but, that was genuinely like a supportive environment and a celebratory one. It wasn't so much grief, because we've definitely experienced grief in our life, and it's kind of been present as servants. You kind of take the brunt of other people's junk, and there's a lot of grief that comes with that. So yeah, I think The Chosen helped me see the disciples and see how they became brothers even though they had differences. And you see Simon Peter and Eden's relationship, and you see a marriage that has Christ literally at the center, and taking a shot like that to change the Bible, something people are, the word was dead to me, not because I wanted it to be, it's just how it was. And then something like this brings the Book of John to life, and takes creative liberties rather successfully in my brain, because it helped me regain that feeling and make it living, and now that word lives in me, that I can take my example of my parents and be a servant, take from The Chosen or really any other hero story or, experience I've had in my life where people have served me. Like it definitely touched me in a way, but it just wasn't like active yet. So, that story of Simon Peter and his wife Eden, the episode about what we're talking about today, feeding 5,000 people with 5 loaves and 2 fish, and the I am statement about the bread of life, about Jesus being the bread of life. I think that episode is really where it starts. So at this point, Eden, his wife, had had a miscarriage, and Simon was extremely upset, that like, why would God let this happen? Why would Jesus be chasing after Gentiles and all these other people who aren't Jewish when his own people are suffering? You could just take this from me, or let me have the child, like either just no child at all, no conception, or let us have the child. He basically gets to the point where he's just like, Jesus can do whatever he wants. So Jesus is giving the sermon, and all these people show up, and they're there for like days on end in the show. In the Bible, I was just reading John chapter 6. Basically, this group is like sold that he's the Messiah, and they're like wanting to, basically just like make him king right then and there. And so Jesus, at one point, the people are hungry. He takes the 5 loaves and 2 fishes and feeds the 5,000. He just, more bread, more fish until everyone's fed. And because of that miracle, that's when they try to kind of get behind him, and he disappears. And in the show, he actually breaks bread with one of the rabbis that was like harassing him about doing miracles on Sabbath and all that, and basically leaving his disciples to cross the sea back to where they were staying, and their home city, because they had traveled to give this sermon. And the way the show does this, because Eden doesn't exist necessarily in the Bible, it was mentioned maybe somewhere that St. Peter had a wife or a woman with him at one point, but it's not like canon. It's not like all over the Bible that he had this. So she had the miscarriage, but didn't have the ritual purification. And there's a scene where Jesus walks on water, and we're going to get into that a little bit more next episode. But yeah, so Simon Peter is just like disillusioned, and saying, Jesus will do whatever he wants. So in the show, when he goes to feed the 5,000, he says at the beginning of the day, this whole trip depends on Simon. And everyone's like confused because Simon's all gruff and, bent out of shape. And he basically just takes the attitude like, yeah, like have faith. Like, I'm pissed off, but like he could have saved my baby if he wanted to. He could do whatever he wants. And not really taking into account that like it's God's grand design that's really behind everything. So that baby wasn't supposed to live. And maybe if his faith didn't necessarily waver, then maybe the baby could have lived, or that wouldn't have been necessary to make him upset and bring him along. So like it's this crazy like decision circle where like what's first, the chicken or the egg? If you just have faith, then these things wouldn't need to happen to you. So regardless of how he had faith, his faith at that point was like the strongest among the group. He was like, yeah, whatever. If he wants to feed these people, he's going to feed them. So whatever, just let it go. And so they all kind of let it go, and then he feeds the people, which is a big miracle followed by him walking literally on water. Like I said, we'll get after that next time. But that gets into the I am statement. So he says, I am the bread of life. In the Bible, this comes after the walking on water. They get back to their home city, and people are talking to him. They said, Lord, we didn't see you come back. Or like they're kind of like asking him questions and poking and prodding, and we want more miracles and more signs. And he gets into this teaching, and the disciples call it the hardest teaching. And it's saying basically like, I am the bread, like I am the way. Like he's already said, I'm the way, truth, and life in a previous episode of this. But this at this point is his first I am statement. Like he's starting to say, who he is. He's starting to identify himself with these people. And he couldn't do it right after the sermon. He kind of had to make a pause. But he's talking to these people, and this isn't in the show. That's the kind of the crazy thing is, so he walks on water, and the whole narrative about Simon Peter happens. Like I said, we'll talk about it next time. So he gets back, and it's really the basis for communion, or the Eucharist, which is like huge in Catholicism and Orthodoxy. It's the taking of the wafer and the drinking of the wine, the body and blood of Christ, and saying like his literal body, like his flesh, is the way to heaven on earth. And I think what that's really saying, what he was trying to say, is that like our spirit is in this body for a short amount of time. Maybe if we're lucky, 100 years. They say maximum lifespan's like 120. So while you're in this body, you have to manifest reality through your body, but by cultivating your spirit. And so Jesus was trying to show an example of how to love people, how to bring them along, and even someone as loyal as Simon Peter, was identified with the physical world and not identifying with God and Jesus. And even though he was like trying to, it's just like we get so attached to the physical world, we can't let it go. And so sometimes I think a child is probably the thing that we get the most attached to in terms of the physical world. Like it's like what we're wired to build and protect, basically. And the way God like gets at you, the way he wins over the strongest among him is typically with a loss like that, the loss of family or the loss of, offspring, because that's the strongest feeling he can elicit, so it doesn't have to get to that point, like I said. But if you resist or you choose not to have faith, it's like really like a surefire way to get there. And I think about that a lot, because I know I actually had an aunt that was my mom's youngest sister. She had two sisters, and I think about when we lost her. I was young enough. I was like barely a teen, and she had cancer, and she passed. And I didn't know her that well, but I could tell she was like a good person deep down. She just had some struggles like we all do, and got cancer, and but I could tell without really ever talking to my grandma about it. I knew it affected her in that deep way where, God removes a child from your life, and you just, what can you do but curse God? And just like Simon Peter, like, he was faithful, but even his faith, like, was not very big. in the grand scheme of things. And strangely enough, by losing that fetus, his faith became like solidified, and then he ended up being the kind of the base, the rock that the church was built on. And it's a crazy thing that it like has to get that far. And I think the only reason, like now myself, having lost people in my life, lost opportunities, lost, quite frankly, my own time because of my own decisions, like wasting my own time, but essentially wasting my life, killing parts of me, years of, beautiful, joyful life I could have had if I could have just seen. It's something that I grieved myself, and I was angry with God for a very long time. I was made this way and was prone to these things, and then I gave in to them, and I was weak, and he made me weak. But I think if you, like, at the end of the day, like, God wants you to choose this of free will, choose love, choose faith, all these, good, virtuous things, and genuinely choose them with all of your heart. And to do that, like, he's got to break you. It's almost like if he just made you that way, it wouldn't mean anything. Like, we could just have this, like, utopian society, but, like, where's the victory? You can't win unless you risk something. And so he takes his perfect creation and he risks it all. And I could very easily right now not be in chiropractic school and be self-destructing still. And for some reason, I when it came down to it, and it was just me and my free will making a choice, like, I made the positive, affirmative choice to create and not destroy, to repair and not continue to damage myself and my opportunities, and quite frankly, his opportunities, because he doesn't necessarily operate directly on earth. He operates through us. So that's what the bread is, the flesh and the blood. It's not literally Jesus's flesh and blood. It's our flesh and blood. It all, is all created by God, and we can use this to affect change here on this earth. And this is the battleground we're in. And it's hard to say where we came from or where we're going or when's it all going to end. But I just know it basically all boils down to a choice. It's entropy. There's chaos and there's order. And you can, give in to chaos and ride that wave, and you'll have a life. But when you try to repair the structure, the perfect structure that we were given before chaos came into play, the more that humanity works together to create that order, we get back to the original image. And, just like a scar or a healed fracture in a bone, like, sometimes that bone is stronger after the fracture. But you have to stop interrupting the process. Like, that's really all we can do is, like, kind of say no, and then you can put it off to the end of your life. And, I don't know for sure what that process was like for my grandma, but I do hope for her sake that she did enough of the healing work that when it came to the end, she had already crossed that, and then she was able to go in peace. And I think from what my mom told me, that was true. And that's the choice we all have. And you can, like me, be peaceful at 35, and I can live out the rest of my years in peace. And I mean, if there's any fights, it's just going to be me trying to help other people see what I've seen. And that involves letting them suffer and then just being there. I hate to see people suffer. But I do know through my own suffering that that's how we get where we're going sometimes. So the work is to show up and just offer your hand to people over and over and over. And they're going to reject you over and over and over, just like Jesus. But all it takes is that one time they say yes, and you kind of pull them out of that, and then they start to pull themselves out. And that's when the magic happens for them. They're going to be on their own journey and stopping their own healing. And that's why I love chiropractic so much, because that's literally what chiropractic is. The nervous system is perfect, and then the chiropractor delivers an adjustment on a bone that's out of place. It's not always just as simple as that. The bone goes out of place, joint gets swollen, there's inflammation, but we give the adjustment, inflammation goes down, the nerves can fire the way they need to, and then the body heals itself. It's not us healing the patient, we're just removing imperfections, and what was already perfect. So I just think it's sacred work, and it's imperative too. Like, I think all through chiropractic school, they've been teaching us the science and the art and a little bit of philosophy, but the people that I'm in school with that are really going to thrive are going to be like me in delving into the philosophy and healing themselves first. And I think this process of being in school, I've been forced. I just know if I'm going to do this the right way, I gotta heal myself. And God's given me all the tools to do that. And I think I've said yes as often as I can. Maybe a couple misunderstandings or a couple times it was too much and I needed to pause. But I feel like I'm showing up to this party right on time. And very thankful for that. And part of that process for me was running into the brothers of Delta Sigma Chi. So this won't be the last time I mean, maybe on this podcast it'll be the last time, but on the other podcast, Gonstead Revival, I'll be going into the 33 principles of chiropractic, which those guys are huge on, and expounding more on that on the chiropractic end. But this podcast, obviously, there's going to be a little bit laced in, but we're going to finish up this series on the miracles that Jesus performed and the I am statements. And then we're going to get into something new. I've been trying to write this book on this podcast forever. And with the help of chiropractic philosophy, I've been able... The chiropractic philosophy is very specific and very... It's not out there. It's actually right. But the people that get excited about it are people that could be classified as early adopters of chiropractic, and maybe people that are deeply, deeply interested in it. And that's like great. Like those green books like reach the right people. What I feel like I need to do is now boil that down, refine it. The same way I want to continue Dr. Gonstead's work. In the same, like I want to like refine this more and more. Just that repair. Those guys, those chiropractors, they had the same energy I have, and they just let all this stuff out, and it was incredible. And they probably wish they could have refined it more before they passed. We only get so many years. So I've now picked up the scent of this trail. And I feel like I can walk it, refine it, and then maybe, if I'm lucky, leave it in a really good spot where someone young can pick up and keep it going, whether it be my son or daughter in the future, or just someone I mentor or whatever it is. Like, I want to make it so, like, make it intentional, consciously do this work and consciously leave it for someone when it's my time to go. because, there's too much disorder, and this is like magical work that's happening. So as much as I can grease this groove for this work to continue and to expand and be refined, I'm going to do it. So this was, if you can't tell, a highly personal episode for me. And the next few, I want to bring it back to the word and make it more not about me, but I feel blessed because in some way, God is kind of making this about me right now for this episode. It just feels very personal. So that feels good, but also out of balance. Got to get back into the balance of me in relation to the world again, all the other people that are living and those that are gone and everything. Like, put myself back in my right size. It is nice to feel like I got poured into for a while. But now, as my cup is full, I will pour back out unto others. So I hope you enjoyed this episode. I hope it made sense. There's a lot of energy coming out of me right now. But to conclude, to summarize, Jesus said he was the bread of life. He literally, earlier that day, fed 5,000 people from just 5 loaves and 2 fish. But he said he was the bread of life. Not literally. Not that they should actually eat his flesh and drink his blood. But that we should take advantage of this animated flesh that we're in. Once we're gone, we can't directly, our body is our interface with physical reality, with this 3-dimensional reality. And this is the only time we can be here and do this work. And it's terrifying at times. But then once you see beyond the veil, you start to get in touch with the spiritual aspects of life. You realize, like, I can't tell you exactly what comes after this, but I do know, like, what we do here feels important. It feels too important to leave it to chance. We should work as hard as we can to be conscious, to consciously do this. Understand as much as we can, and then be smart about, like, our choices. And leave it better than we found it. So that's where I'll end for today. But I think maybe Thursday or Friday, I'll record another one and post it. It's going to be about the walking on water. We'll get into it. And the middle I am statement of I am the good shepherd. It's a little bit like gate for the sheep. And a little bit about what I touched on earlier in terms of inviting people. I think that's really more what it's about. So we'll get into that. And then, 2 more episodes after that. And then I might just get back on that weekly cadence here. It's been nice to have 2 weeks. And you can see, even with the 2 weeks, I still missed a couple deadlines. So it was good for me to slow down. I don't know how I knew that I was going to need to slow down a little bit. But obviously it wasn't me that knew, if you catch my drift. So if you listened this far, that was your little treat there at the end. But until next time, y'all. See you later.